Well, welcome. We're so excited to have you here. This is our first Walgreens webinar. My name is Melanie Brooks, and I am the Marketing and Communications Manager for the University of Maine Graduate School of Business. So we're joining you from Maine. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the Dean of the Graduate School of Business, Dr. Norm O'Reilly.
All right. Thank you, Melanie. And thank you for the introduction and all the setups. Hopefully everyone can see the screen in front of you. So here at the University of Maine and the Maine Business School and the Graduate School of Business, we're thrilled to be a Walgreens partner. As Melanie said, this is our first webinar. We've got another one planned for a couple of weeks and hope to continue that relationship into the future. And we hope you can benefit from some of the information and details that we can provide to you. And now we're going to get into the heart of the presentation. And there's so much going on in the world right now. And it's really challenging actually to nail it down. If you look at different sectors of the economy in different parts of the country and around the world, things are really moving in challenging directions, exciting directions, prosperous directions, but challenging directions for those that are just getting started or don't have a lot of resources and those kind of pieces going forward. So as we're thinking about 2022 and going beyond, there's a lot of things happening. And so before we even kind of get into that, just a few thoughts out there. And obviously you can't not talk about the giant gorilla in the room, whatever to call it, which is COVID-19. And many people have talked about this. There's lots out there. If you kind of really, really dig it down, we've had about 2 decades of shifts in terms of technology, consumer behavior, social activities, the way we do things in about 2 years. So things have just rapidly accelerated. So there's some changes in there, but most people would argue these were things that were coming anyways, notwithstanding the horrible consequences that COVID led to for many people, but from a kind of a business perspective and a societal one that were likely to come anyways. But some things that's really led to that are going to be challenges for organizations around the world. We've seen a considerable, and I've done some research in this area, just a considerable drop in the average health of people. And so one thing that COVID led people to do was be more at home, which had a lot of upsides, but also had a lot of challenges. And early on, people would find ways to stay active, but eventually, and a lot of didn't go back to their clubs or their gyms, or they've been closed and got people put on some weight. There's a lot of studies out there that says the average person in the country put on 10 pounds, 15 pounds, these kind of challenges. Adults much more negatively affected than youth, but youth lost years of organized sports and activities. So some argue that's at a really crisis level. There's a lot of fear out there. So even though things are booming right now and unemployment is very, very low and job opportunities are all over the place, the longer term horizon studies show that people are really concerned about, is my job going to exist in 10 years? Is my industry going to shift or disappear? Or how's it going to work? And a lot of those things are kind of permeating with people. Social justice and equity, as we all know, have really risen to be very, very important, as they should be. With the Black Lives Matter movement, all during this kind of pandemic time. And that's top of mind for everybody. This notion of homification is really an interesting one. And there's the work side of it. I'll give some numbers in a little bit, where more and more people are working from home. And that's really changing the dynamic. But we're also playing at home, entertaining at home, spending more time, wanting more space at home. So people are moving out of small, but they want land, and that's driven the real estate market to crazy proportions in many places. It's led to the greatest migration into Maine, for instance, that we've seen in 40 years. People want to live in these more outdoor home environments where they can really do a lot very close to home and limit their interaction, their physical interaction with other people. There's been this interest in, notwithstanding the fact that people are less active, people want to be more active. So there's a role here for organizations and governments to try to fit that need. It's challenging, but people don't have the same level of access to things. If you're not going into an office every day, it's harder to plan your schedule and think about the gym you went to at lunch, or the volleyball team you played for after lunch, or the group you would walk with in the morning. These things get more challenging, and so we're seeing that as well. Cooking at home has exploded. We saw one statistic that's really interesting for those that follow the seafood industry, is 26% of Americans who have previously never eaten fish at home had fish at home during the pandemic. So you're at home, forced to be at home. You can't go to restaurants. Eventually you learn how to do it. And that industry is definitely hoping that's going to stick going forward. Online shopping, we look at Amazon, we'll talk about that a bit, has just exploded. And then most people have now realized this really shifted as studies went on over the last couple of years. The most recent ones, we're not going back to the way life was before. It's going to be different. What's going to be different? And so people are now planning for that as opposed to hoping for a return to normal. So it gives you a bit of the general stuff that's going on, some pure economic stuff. There's as I mentioned, inflation in the last couple of months has been the highest it's been in years. We're talking 6, 7, 8%, whatever part of the country you're in, and yet interest rates have said low. The government is saying it's going to go up soon, but no specific date given. So it's a very uncertain kind of economic time. So these aren't in any particular order, but they're 12 things that we thought you could learn from and take away, and will help with your own investing, help with Walgreens, help with the things you're kind of thinking about as we go for there. So this whole notion that we won't go back and that home is where we want to be. So home is this place. And so before the pandemic, just under 10% of people in the United States who were working at home or in a remote environment. So it was starting to happen, but still a very small proportion. At the height of the pandemic, about a year ago, that number hit about 60%. And there's a bunch of surveys done out there that you can see one of the ones quoted here that says that where we'll end up. And this is a survey that talks to employers and employees and citizens generally. Will come back to about a third, a little more than a third will work remotely by 2025. And then even those that aren't working remotely, we're seeing more flexibility. So offices saying 2 or 3 days a week can travel in different places. Maybe you don't need to be in these environments all the time. And so that's really shifting. So we're definitely not going to go back. Don't plan on it. You think about an organization like Walgreens. What does that mean for the products, the times you're going to be open, when you sell things, et cetera, is really going to change and continue to change. Finding new talent. I mean, we've heard this a lot. This is a main problem. There's lots of parts of the country and around the world that deal with this. And there's a backlog of jobs that just are not filled. And it's now a nationwide problem. And it's really, really an interesting thing. And you've heard about the great resignation, or in some cases, the great retirement, or in some cases, the great shuffle. But people have moved around. And a lot of people have just decided, I don't want to work anymore. Or this whole view of, and I'm a Gen Xer, right? We're very driven by money. Millennials and boomers are taking very different approaches. And they're saying, hey, I'm done. One of us is going to work, or I'm going to pivot back and I'm going to do a bit of consulting from home. And instead of living in the downtown of an expensive city, I'm going to sell my place and go live in a rural area, work a bit. So about 4.5 million Americans in December 21 quit their jobs, exited the workforce. And that includes retirements, early retirements, shifters, not people that lost their job that are going to come back, but people that have chosen not to work. There were 10.6 million open posted jobs. So keep in mind, there's probably many more than that in the informal world, but posted jobs available in December, and 7.1 million people got hired into new jobs. So just an extraordinary environment where if you want a job, you can get one. Is it the one you want? Not necessarily. Is this skewed towards entry-level jobs? Yes. Are people just saying, hey, I don't want to work in that anymore? You get organizations like right near my house, for instance, there's a retirement seniors home that's offering a $3,000 signing bonus for someone to sit at the front desk and do reception. McDonald's is paying $25 an hour in some parts of the country. If you go to a restaurant, I was at a Texas Roadhouse, and they're offering tuition vouchers, dental benefits, startups, signing bonuses to be a waiter or a waitress. So there's a huge shift happening out there that makes it really, really hard to recruit people into jobs. Number 3 then, and this is highly related to number 2, is cherish the talent that you have. And this would be for any of you that are managers or work with people that are really thinking about this, is how do you keep people that are good, or even people that are satisfactory? Because replacing them is going to be really, really, really hard. You clearly still want to move on from people that don't want to be there or aren't performing, et cetera. But anybody that's contributing and doing their job, replacing them is going to be really, really, really high. And we're seeing people really thinking about retiring early and wanting to live these more balanced lives. How do you help them get there? That's a huge retention technique. Flexibility. I'll show some data later on of how people have been really impacted, particularly those with children during this environment still are being impacted. How do you offer flexibility in terms of work schedules and when people could come and opportunities to consume things like I know Walgreens is doing with these webinars, when you want to, how you want to. Pay is very important. One of the interesting things that the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows, if you look at the data, is that it's less about in terms of this great resignation, great retirement. We've also seen a huge increase in the average salary of those that are working. So a lot of people that were in lower income jobs have either moved to higher income jobs and then no one's replaced behind, or people that have exited from these jobs for a number of those reasons that I talked about before. So pay is really, really important if you can find a way to make that work in your particular environment. People want a safe place to work. They want a comfortable place to work. They want to be able to come in and go as they please. Variety of different shifts, and then cohorts. We'll talk about this later on, but we've got the next gen coming, but millennials, Gen Xers, and boomers, and a few of the kind of post World War II cohorts still working with completely divergent views of how to work and how to interact with people. And is very, very, very challenging. And so you can just see what's going out there and how tricky it actually is. One derivative I wanted to flip for you just around this number 3 was that put your situation. For a lot of you, we're assuming that you're in the earlier stages of your career or mid-career and you're looking for new opportunities. Well, flip it around. The time is right for advancement internally. People ahead of you or around you are going to move around. Opportunities for growth are going to be extraordinary. You can be sure your organization is looking for ways to retain its talent. If you're really, really good and have potential, it is really an exciting time. So as challenging it is on the employer manager side, it can be very exciting for that young mid-career professional who wants to work, has skills, and is really motivated. So think about that as you kind of roll forward. Use of contract workers has also just gone up enormously. And this is related to those things that we talked about. And a lot of this is actually driven on the employee side. It's saving employers money, but a lot of employees don't want to have the pressure of being a full-time employee. So they're saying, I want to work 60% of the hours for 60% of the salary, and I only want to be around here 3 days a week. Or I want the ability to work in this way. I want to have a certain chunk of the year off. I want to do my 12 months of work over 9 months and be paid 9 months over 12 months. We're seeing more and more and more of this. And in a recent survey showed that 1/3 of all US organizations have started to have employees in this kind of contractual contingent work environment. So that's really going up and very interesting and will be for the future as we kind of go forward. One more thing I wanted to say on the contingent worker was it also provides that worker with some tax benefits because you then are like a sole proprietorship, your own organization. So you can write off a number of the costs against your taxes that you couldn't as a full-time employee. So there's that benefit I wanted to add in there as well, which I should have added. This one, but it's just important to remember because often we drop back and we don't go as in deep to these things as we might think we would like to. And that's this rise of the digital economy. And you can see on the right there some of the different areas of huge growth around trust, cybersecurity, the cloud and storage things, software development, so like these massive servers and maintenance of them underground, the vital importance of having backups to data and data recovery, if any. These organizations are just exploding with opportunities. There aren't enough engineers, there aren't enough technologists. Universities aren't pumping them fast enough. Students don't want to take these degrees at a high enough number. There's a talent gap there that's just enormous. And last year, some of the big cities, so San Francisco in North America, Toronto, New York, they said there's, in some cases, 50,000, 60,000 unfilled technology jobs that they can't either hire, migrate workers in, and find people to cover these jobs. So just an incredible growth. So that's where everything's going. And we've seen a lot of that little bump when COVID first hit, but now we've really largely figured it out in terms of the digital economy and where it's kind of going. I wanted to give a couple of examples here. I think Amazon's pretty straightforward. They've doubled, if not quadrupled, and some things their revenues have doubled, they've quadrupled their overall business. They're just absolutely exploding. There's others who've popped up that are kind of trying to compete like them. But I wanted to use a Canadian example, which is a good one. Canadian Tire, which some of you may not know, but it's an organization that was really starting to struggle. It's been around for many years, pretty old fashioned, and it's just come off its largest 3 quarters in its history. And what COVID forced this older organization to do was to pivot and become digital and add Amazon-like offerings, to add curbside delivery, to chop old-fashioned products, to change their supply chain like a Walmart has done or as Amazon has done, and build their own product lines and acquire other organizations, integrate them in. And they've followed that model and have now become massively profitable. So owning supply chains, digital sales, these are the things that are really, really booming. And they go, wow, how does that going to kind of work? And how does it going to go for us? Obviously, if you're something like a Walgreens, pieces of your product line fit here. Pieces still require in-person interactions like the pharmacy, COVID shots, tests, etc. But there's those kind of pieces which are really, really important, and we don't want to lose track of. A little bit of an upside, because some negativity we've talked about so far, would be that we're ready for a rapid recovery. Whether you talk about tourism, I mean, for instance, the cruise ship industry is sold out almost for 2023. People are desperate to travel when they feel like it's going to be safe again, and we're getting closer and closer with vaccines, control of the virus, the way airlines are running things, et cetera, et cetera. So there's just this big pent-up demand. Another tourism study which I just read about was that every American that wants to travel again when they can is 77%. And they're planning to take 3 trips in the last half of 2022. So really, really exciting things happening around economic projections. We've learned a lot about, you've heard about Bitcoin, and we've also, in my world, which is the sport business, we've learned a lot about these NFTs. And so people actually purchasing digital content that's unique content. So this particular image of LeBron James dunking over a 7-foot center has actually been bought. And you can still YouTube it and found it, but someone has purchased the token that is this digital on the idea that they could say they own it, but one day it will be worth something. And so as we see society, and there's lots of different forecasts on this when you think about digital money versus our traditional monetary system, actual assets that you can touch or hold or have versus those which are digital and can be reproduced, but in this case that are unique, that are its only image that's like that. And then at some point the technology would allow that person to have ownership to it, like you would a rookie card of a baseball player, and that it could be then sold and resold and buying it. And a lot of people are starting to take risks on purchasing some of these assets, and it's coming. Now, whether it's 5 years from now or 25 years from now, it's really accelerated in this environment. The digital asset is something to really think about more from an investing side and a future of work side. Diversity, I think Walgreens is way ahead of the curve on this, is definitely here. And I mean, the one stat that everyone loves to talk about is that in 2015, there were more non-Hispanic white babies born in the United States than not. And since then, it's continued to increase. So you fast forward 20 years, the country is a complete mosaic of people of different colors and backgrounds, very, very different than it kind of looks today. That's here. We're obviously struggling with some of the challenges around that, as you've seen in many cases in the last couple of years. But from a pure marketing perspective, a pure talent perspective, a pure cultural perspective, that's the pure reality of the future. So how do we plan for some of these things? Well, one of the neat things, one of the interesting things is part of that also leads to this cohort gap, right? So this is something that I'm sure you see in your customers, people that are coming in, is that the majority of those that are older are white, and the majority of those that are younger are non-white. And so this not only leads to this cohort gap that's based on age, but it's also based in a lot of cases on culture and ethnicity, and people that are in that boomers group, which is now about 58 and plus, 58 to 70 years of age, who still dominate a lot of the workforce, but are exiting relatively quickly and have a lot of the money. The vast majority are white versus the younger generations, where it's a much more mixed environment, as you can kind of see there going forward. So what does this mean for technology, day-to-day interactions that we have amongst people? So I just pulled together a couple of little interesting things here to kind of illustrate how this is different. And there's a lot written about how we deal digitally and in person, being from these different cohorts, right? And you can see a couple of the examples there of how we view things. So the boomer, I'm somewhere in between, is the Gen Xer. Most of our students are millennials of young and old ages. And then coming right in, now starting university, are Gen Zs, who again are a completely different thought view of the world, who are going to join the workforce in big numbers over the next 5 years as the boomers start to exit. It's a really kind of interesting time. So if you layer race on top of age, it's really challenging to deal with some of these people. And you can see those examples in front of you as just illustrations, and there's lots of them out there when we think about this kind of group. Number 10, we're getting there. One thing very negative that came out of COVID-19 and a lot of the trends that happened was that it was very negative for women. And so after many years of this glass ceiling closing and more women moving into C-suite positions and physicians and engineers, we've seen it really take a step backwards. And numbers in engineering programs and STEM type programs where salaries tend to be higher have now stepped back, and there's fewer women again. And you're seeing numbers in some schools like 10% and 15% and 12%. So it was a very negative thing. Even more negative was that women with children were the most affected. Now, obviously, you're taking the perspective that it's good for the workforce to have both genders well represented and the smartest people from our population, from all genders and backgrounds working, which I certainly believe, and I think most people do. We saw a huge hit, and you can see the numbers there. So this great resignation that caused people that are like, hey, do I want to work so hard? Do I need as much money do I have? Why do I need to live here when I could live somewhere further away? Maybe one of us needs to work and I can work part-time in a couple environment, et cetera. But women with children, men with children too, but women with children were by far the hardest hit in terms of career. It's not advancing, careers stopping, careers getting stagnant that wanted to, and you can see those numbers there. And even a bit more numbers, and there's just a photo to kind of illustrate, but you think about this pandemic, and we still don't have vaccines for kids under 5. There's still not a lot of trust out of there. There's still a lot of organizations, much like universities, that a lot of our functions are still in this digital environment or highly masked environments or very cautious environments. Depends where you are in the country and around the world. There's a variety of different world, but it's still there. It's still kind of out there. And you can see some numbers there of mothers and fathers, and the mothers really took the brunt of their work and their career taking a step backwards, which after many years of progress is definitely a very negative thing. So we have to think of some ways to make that better. Flip this around, another one, number 11. And so this is presence-free living. It's a great term that I think has emerged from the like homification that's emerged from the pandemic and these recent times. I don't know who all watched the Super Bowl, but about 100 million of us did in this country. But there's a lot of cool commercials, but a couple of them were really based on this idea of localization and not having to go somewhere to buy something. And so the Bank of America ads, you probably recognize that visual on the left, was around banking at a wedding. So you think about it, was brilliantly done. So you had a wedding where we're all thinking about family and friends and fun, and they showed a variety of people banking while they're at the wedding, not going to a branch, not going to a website, from their phone where they wanted to be. And I know there's a lot of, if you Google about Vroom, there's a lot of dissatisfaction. I don't think they've nailed it yet, and you still can't do it fully in most cases, but there's a huge interest from people not having to go to a car dealership to buy a car. And so this is coming. Will they figure it out? Maybe. Will they be the first one? You can do it already, but they were promoting at the Super Bowl, which tells you something, that people want to move in this direction. I personally bought a house in Maine during the pandemic fully online, the biggest purchase of my life, and you buy it online. And so this is really coming. So there's less intimacy, which is very challenging for old-fashioned sales techniques and customer interactions, but very powerful for supply chain and global or far-reaching markets and efficiencies of scale and clarity of backgrounds and checks and smart decisions and safety, all those things, really challenges we kind of think about where we want to go and how we want to go forward. And the last one, and this is a really challenging one, and it goes in many directions and it can be highly debated. But this whole notion of privacy is really quite interesting. And we've seen trust, for instance, is the way you look at things. Or, for many, many years, parent, you would never leave your kids alone at a sporting event with their coach. Well, during COVID, you weren't allowed into certain rooms or different places the way they go. And so there's been this interesting kind of movement around that piece. And then in trust around, science has stayed very, very high in the United States, but much, much higher in Democrats than Republicans. So Democrats have gone up, Republicans have gone down a little bit. When we think about online communications and trusting our banking and putting our money online, well, I don't even think twice about it. And I'm in my late 40s, right? People, same way, but you talk to my parents and others, some people really don't trust those things anymore, right? Or never did. And they're very, very careful where they put things and how they do. Fraud is at an all-time high. People stealing things online at an all-time. So there's all these interesting things happening, and it's going in different directions. I think we're not even sure about identity theft versus safety, all those kind of things. So that's really been thrown into a lurch, and a lot of us are trusting of the technology and the securities out there. Some people aren't. Again, there's an age factor here, an environment factor, and a number of things to think about. So I probably went a little bit longer than maybe I thought I would, but there's the 12 themes that I think are worthwhile to think about and to maybe take away as you look at either your investments, Walgreens activities, things you might do at work, your children, your family, people around you, decisions you make with your investments. Hopefully those things are helpful as you kind of work your way forward. And with that, my contact information is there if you want to reach out, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Norm. Again, attendees, if you have any questions for Norm, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them. I see one question, Norm. Of all of the trends that you listed, all of the 12, which would be the most important for Walgreens as a company to be ready for?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously it would be a number of them are very, very important, because you think about your customer base, right? Like Walgreens does have customers online, but still is primarily a come to the pharmacy or the store, the retail outlet, whether it's drive-through or in person, to purchase products or receive services. We mentioned a few of these things like tests, et cetera. So as people are thinking about this presence-free living and moving away from urban environments and not wanting to leave work and not having these same kind of structured days, whether that's a third to 40% of the population, how do you maintain a service for that particular group? And how do you kind of scale, right? So how do you offer some of your products in a more digital way versus that consumer just going to Amazon and ordering that product direct? And that's what a lot are facing, right? It's very easy now and often less expensive to go purchase whatever that might be immediately. Now, in some cases, you get a doctor, right, for the pharmacy side of it, and you kind of need to go. But we've seen our medical system move enormously. I mean, I'm now, like, I've got my doctor, I'm almost 50, did my big physical. It's all on a portal, right? It's all done digital, other than the actual visit. Very, very different than in the past. And if follow-ups happen, you go here, you go here. So you can see the medical industry is also moving that way. They want to service people in a better way. And you can see doctors' visits happening like you and I are chatting right now. So getting on top of that and not being set in the ways of moving away from the digital economy is really interesting. The second one, which would be a group of them, I think is very important, would be around the talent piece. And as you think about a position like a pharmacist, or a very talented store manager, or someone who's got expertise in a certain product line, or someone who understands COVID testing. Like, you've got a whole, and I could go on, but a whole number of specialty positions that are not easy to hire for. You got to really look at those and say, well, how are we paying? What's our benefit package like? People don't want a low-paying job that's 40 hours a week over 5, 6, 7 days in some cases, odd hours, can't be with their kids, can't do this, have to be in person. Those people are exiting, and there aren't people lining up behind them. I'll give you a great example. So I mentioned I'm in the sport industry. We have told students for 20 years that it's super hard to get a job for a pro sports team. I mean, selling tickets and sponsorship, you're at the game all the time, and they would have thousands of people. For the first time since I've been involved, which is 25 years, they're having a hard time finding good talent for these jobs. Because people, I don't want to be at a home game, 81 home games for the Boston Red Sox, and I don't want to be working so many nights, and I don't want to be selling all that. And they were very low paid. So all of a sudden, you see this kind of the pay's got to come up. You got to think about that if you want to keep people a long time, or they're going to churn through. Then it's going to be very challenging for the organization. So I know I gave you two answers to the question, but those would be the two that I would stress.
One of our participants had mentioned that number three, cherishing the talent you have, had resonated with them. So
Right.
That was a good answer. Another question was, you spoke a bit about the impact of some of these trends on women and mothers. Any suggestions on what we do to reduce some of these impacts?
This is a big one, and thanks for asking. I think and this is really hard to do at an individual level, but I think we can be advocates for women, and we all have mothers and sisters and partners and spouses and people that we know. I think everyone can relate to that. And obviously, gender has become a more complicated construct in recent years, so we got to keep all that in mind. But if we keep it as a very simple kind of view, and then think about the woman who wants to have a family and wants to have children, who is by far the hardest hit, not necessarily only, but the hardest hit. How do we as a society and organizations enable her to balance her life without becoming, like, you've heard all these stories of the super moms and the soccer moms who just do everything. And men, I think, are getting better, or spouses are getting better. There's obviously same-sex partnerships and all these things, but are getting better at supporting each other. But there's still some more traditional things. There's still roles that are associated with gender that are important there. So you think about the one thing that I always find interesting, this is a Canadian perspective, is the length of maternity leave in the United States is so short. I mean, that, in my mind, that has to be changed. So you need to give the woman, if she doesn't want it, that's fine. But if you give her the option to spend some time, if she wants, with her job protected. And other countries have been doing that. Some countries have up to 2 years, some have 1. That's one thing that I think needs to happen. At the organizational level, having those benefit packages. So for instance, if she wants to come back and work, then you can support maybe her partner in staying home with the baby, or having better support for daycare, access to it on venue, or abilities to work for home. So if she's a superstar and up and coming manager, she doesn't have to just jump off her career, which a lot are choosing not to, or exit her career to be a mom. And so that's what we're seeing happening more. I could be talking like it's 1970, right? But a lot of these trends returned, not anywhere near as bad as it was, but returned again during these COVID times. And that hurts the economy. You're losing some of your best talent. So I think it's advocating for organizational and governmental changes to the supports that we would have for women who want them in those particular areas.
Do you think that many of us just assumed that we were beyond this sort of stuff, and then COVID hit, and then realized maybe we're not as far along as we thought?
It was interesting. I did, you probably saw it. I did an interview with the mayor of Portland, first female, I think she's the first female mayor of Portland, brilliantly talented woman. And I asked a similar question to what you just asked me. And she was like, is that still a problem? And I think here's a woman who's a role model for others. And I think once we got into the conversation, she's like, oh yeah, that's so. But I think a lot of us thought we were moved on from that, and it should be more about, racial incongruence and cultural challenges and how we treat, Native Americans, and this kind of issues are bigger, but it's still there. And then it really kicked back once, this pressure came on from COVID. And it was the women who wanted to have a family and that have now chosen to exit the workforce. And you could talk to the senior management, I'm sure, at Walgreens, and there's some surprises, I would guess, that some very talented female professional and managerial staff exited, not to go work at another pharmacy or another retailer or another organization, but just said, hey, I'm not going to work anymore, or I'm going to work in a different way because I don't need this. And that's this weird thing for a lot of us to wrap our heads around. Great shuffle, great resignation, whatever you want to call it, that's happened out there. And sadly, has hit the female professional more than the male professional.
That's interesting. If anyone has some last questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. While you're thinking, I am going to drop our website, which is umaine.edu/business, so that if anyone is interested in learning about our online options, you can go there. We have an online Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Management, and an online MBA program. We really do appreciate having all of you here today. And I will be sending out a recording to everyone that registered for this event, because I know things happen and sometimes you can't make it to the meetings that you want to make it. I don't see any more questions. So Norm, do you have any closing comments?
No, that would be great. Thanks for the questions that we have. And just to reiterate, and we showed early on some of the offerings that we have. And I think we shared all of our contact information, mine as well. Happy to follow up if anyone's got any additional questions or wants to see some of the studies or data behind some of the things we share. And I just thank everyone for taking the time to listen.
Great. Thank you, everybody. It was nice spending my lunch hour with you. Goodbye.